Hi, welcome to today's Close Looking. I'm Caroline Shields, Associate Curator and Head of European Art, and I'm so excited to be here today to have a close look at Gustave Caillebotte's Blue Irises Garden at Petit Gennevilliers. First, I want to acknowledge that the Art Gallery of Ontario operates on land that is territory of the Anishinaabe-Mississauga Nation and is also the territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is also governed by a treaty between the federal government of Canada and the Mississaugas of the New Credit Anishinaabe Nation. Toronto has always been a trading center for First Nations. The painting that we're going to look at today is one that was acquired by the AGO in 2019, so it's a relatively recent addition to our 19th century European art gallery. And it's one that truly rewards looking closely, ideally in person. It's one that I studied for a couple of years before finally actually being able to see it in person. And even after spending literally a couple of years looking at it, it truly unfolds and offers so much more through this kind of face-to-face interaction with the painting. That said, there is so much that can be seen from looking at it closely in digital reproduction. And so we are going to dive right in and have a look at it today. So here's the painting, again called Blue Irises Garden at Petit Gennevilliers. And it was painted by Gustave Caillebotte, a member of the French Impressionist movement in 1892. Caillebotte was a major leader, actually, of the Impressionist movement. He was independently quite wealthy and played a leading role in organizing many of the Impressionist original exhibitions. He was a patron of these artists. He purchased many of the works that Monet and Renoir were making right in the heart of the Impressionist movement in the 1870s. And because he was independently wealthy and sold, therefore, very few of his own works, he just didn't need to sell them, he was remembered after his death and for several decades after he died, more as a collector of Impressionist painting than as a painter himself. And due to this long and fascinating history of the fate of his paintings after he died, this is why he's not as nearly as well known as many of the other Impressionists that he so closely worked with. This painting was the second painting by Gustave Caillebotte to enter a Canadian collection. The first one is in Hamilton, Ontario, and so we are so happy to have this one here in Toronto to share with you. Now let's take a close look. I have it in Windows Photo Viewer in order to be able to zoom right in. As you can see, there are several blossoms of irises and foxgloves here. My favorite iris blossom is this one. Full disclosure, I love paintings where you can see kind of evidence of the artist's hand at work, which I think is most visible when you can almost reconstruct the brushstrokes that the artist applied to the canvas. And thanks to the really incredible condition of this canvas, we can still see many of those brushstrokes here. So for example, I just love where you can see this kind of thick, wet oil paint that Caillebotte's applying to the canvas in this blossom. We have this light blue, a much deeper kind of blue violet. And this blue color is one that Caillebotte's quite well known for. It's called Caillebotte blue. And I'll talk a little bit later about his paintings in the city of Paris that he's best known for, but we can actually see that blue operating here in this violet blue color of the irises. Something that I enjoy looking when we take a close look at paintings is almost reconstructing, like an archaeologist, the layers of paint and how they were applied to the canvas. So here, for example, you can see that this light blue color in the middle, he kind of did this stroke and then this one cross-cuts it. So that helps us understand that all of this paint was wet as he applied it. So one thick stroke and another thick stroke that comes across it. He's working, building up that texture as he goes. On the other hand, you see this darker blue stroke and how it sort of touches and kisses the top and the ridge of the underlying lighter kind of white cream stroke underneath, that means that this thick whitish stroke was a little bit dry by the time that he came back later and applied this one going across the top, because this one otherwise would have sort of cut that texture off, but instead it graces the top, kind of like snow on top of a mountain. And that helps us understand that actually this highlight is one that Caillebotte came back and applied a little bit after this underlying one was dry. Other places though where the paint mixes, like especially in this green, you see how the green sort of blends in with the yellow white. That means that those underlying colors were still wet as he was working. So we have just these amazing kind of quick, short strokes that he applies throughout. And then moving over to the foxgloves, again, I really love these little dashes that he puts onto the canvas that together help create this bursting sensation. These foxglove buds are just about to bloom. And he knew, as himself a gardener, we can know today as well, this happens when these flowers bloom in Toronto, foxgloves bloom after irises. And so it's quite accurate that irises would be in full bloom when the foxgloves are in bud. And I just love that they just look so full and ready to burst here. And then moving over a little bit here, we can see these dashes, the really confidently applied strokes of green coming straight down, just such a different way of working in this foreground area than what we see in the much more thickly built up irises. And here's some more beautiful blossoms along the top. And just another part that I love and really honestly didn't even notice until seeing this in person, but we can see it in reproduction, this wonderful kind of rose mauve of the background. I don't actually know what, it's kind of like almost a dry brush that he's denoting through this rosy color, but I love that it kind of looks brown from far away, but when you get close, it's this incredible rosy color. And what resolved for me most in seeing this painting in person before we finally were able to go through with the acquisition is that while it looks very kind of flat in reproduction, in person it has quite a sense of recession. The illusion of depth in space comes through. And the way that he achieves that is not just by kind of making the background details a little bit blurrier, but actually that very texture, that thick, really three-dimensional texture of the paint itself that he builds up in the foreground, he's relying on that sharpness of the paint to give the sharpness of the foreground. This bush is what denotes the middle ground, and it's kind of a little bit more, you know, it's dark, it's sharply painted, but not quite as much as the foreground. And then the background really just gets kind of blurry in his brushwork. And so in person, it actually creates this kind of depth of field effect where it feels truly like he's creating this illusion of spatial recession. And in that way, the painting almost unfolds the longer that you spend time with it. So perspectively looking at this painting, I like to think of what view, what angle are we seeing it from? Often in art history, we'll talk about a bird's eye view as if you're seeing something from above, or a worm's eye view if you're seeing something from the ground, from below. And for this, I think it's actually a gardener's eye view. It's as if we are on our knees in the dirt, working around these flowers and kind of see them literally from the gardener's knee. So it's a knee eye view of the flowers, which just gives us so much a sense of being embedded in this garden. And that makes a lot of sense for Caillebotte as a gardener, because he not only was a prolific artist, but he was also a really dedicated, passionate gardener. Caillebotte, as I said, was independently quite wealthy, and he had originally lived in Paris. That's where he was. That's where he grew up. That's where his painting career first launched. That's where he made his most famous paintings, such as Paris Street Rainy Day, that's in Chicago, the Floor Scrapers, which is in Paris, the Pont de l'Europe, which is in a private collection and came to Toronto for the Impressionism in the Age of Industry exhibition last February, actually just a few months before we acquired this painting. And so those are all paintings of city streets, bustling, dynamic views of Parisian streets and intersections, and Floor Scrapers is an interior in Paris. And that sort of love of rhythm, of geometry, of engineering is a passion that Caillebotte actually brought with him to the suburbs when he left Paris and moved to the suburb of Petit Gennevilliers, where he set up an incredible garden. He had not one but two greenhouses. And at a time in 1892, when most of Paris did not yet have a sewage system, Caillebotte actually had a sprinkler system for his garden. And so an incredible amount of resources and technology were deployed toward this passion that he had for horticulture. And he developed this passion in a way. For him, this garden he loved it for the garden. He loved working the earth. He loved working with and growing these flowers, but it was also a kind of laboratory as he experimented with these new technologies, and a painting studio. He painted these flowers, and the garden was a regular, I don't want to say eternal, but a kind of endless fountain of inspiration for him and his work in the last decade or so of his career. So Caillebotte is this kind of dedication toward his garden and painting his garden may, if you're familiar with the Impressionists, be ringing a bell. It may sound quite a bit like Claude Monet and his very famous garden at Giverny. You can still visit Monet's garden at Giverny, and the plantings are kept up. He has a beautiful garden, a beautiful pond on the back section. And of course, Monet's canvases from Giverny are famous as well, the world over. Monet lived for several more decades than Caillebotte did, and I sometimes like to imagine what might have come if Caillebotte had more time and continued developing this genre. So the relationship between Caillebotte and Monet in this genre that really they pioneered together of garden painting is a really mutually inspirational relationship. The two of them wrote many, many letters back and forth between each other, talking about gardening, talking about their passion for flowers, occasionally writing about painting. And I have some quotes that I would love to share with you. The third artist in this kind of garden-loving artist trio is a poet named Octave Mirbeau, who was also friends of both Caillebotte and Monet. And Mirbeau pens a letter in which he's writing to Monet that he's really excited for a visit where the three of them, Mirbeau, Monet, and Caillebotte, are going to get together. He writes that we will, quote, "We will talk about gardening, as you say, because as for art and literature, that's all just banter. There is nothing but earth." The last line is "Il n'y a que la terre." So you could say there is only earth, there is nothing but earth is how it's often translated, but almost like there's only dirt. And it speaks to this just deep, almost visceral love that the three of them have for exchanging these ideas about the depth of gardening and the depth that they find in painting their gardens. And to add just kind of an autobiographical note, it's not quite autobiographical, a biographical note about Caillebotte and his garden. The story that I'm going to share here is almost surely apocryphal. It's more or less impossible, I believe, but it speaks to the identification that he and other artists had between him and his garden. As the story goes, Caillebotte was at a dinner with his Impressionist colleagues, which is true. Caillebotte and the Impressionists often did get together to just have friendly dinner conversations. As the story goes, at this final dinner where he was with his artist colleagues, he said, "You will see my garden in the spring." And he died shortly thereafter. However, this story was penned in 1922. Caillebotte died in 1894, so several years after his death. And the story was told by Claude Monet's biographer, Gustave Caillebotte, So what I love about the story is that it has almost this Last Supper-like pronouncement from Caillebotte. I am going to leave you, but you will see my garden in the spring. My garden will be there and will greet you. The blossoms will remind you of me after I pass. Caillebotte did die very young. He was only 45 years old, and the cause of death is, there are kind of various reasons given, often related to his heart or lungs, but he died extremely suddenly and quite young. So this painting was actually made just 2 years before he passed, and especially given the incredibly prolific and beautiful, innovative work that Monet went on to make in the last decades of the 19th century and the early decades of the 20th century, I just can't help but wonder, with Caillebotte step in step with Monet in these early years of painting their gardens, what might Caillebotte have come to had he lived a little bit past these final years, just 2 years before he passed. So why are garden paintings so kind of rich as a subject for two incredible artists of the Impressionist era? It's not just that they're beautiful. I hope that this has kind of led us toward wondering what it is that these artists see in flowers. And what I like to think a lot about, something that's been explored often by art historians, is a sort of metaphorical relationship between the garden as a painting studio, as a laboratory. If we think about the genre of still life, which is a genre in which the artist composes a tableau on the table. So the artist takes objects from his or her household and assembles them, say, on a table, and then paints them. It's often said that a still life painting is doubly creative by the artist because they compose it twice. They compose the setup once on their table, and then they compose it again on their canvas. And if we carry that through to Caillebotte and Monet's garden paintings, where they were the gardeners, they were the people who planted these flowers, it actually redoubles the creative act of the artist. They are not only the creators of the painting, but they actually gave life to these flowers. They brought the flowers into being. And so these blue irises are flowers that are twice created by Caillebotte's hands. And that's just something I kind of love to dwell on while spending time in front of this really beautiful painting. I just find it quite relaxing. I have been to the AGO just once since it's been open, since COVID began, and just really found this painting a peaceful one to stand in front of and reflect on our relationship with the land and with beauty, and just with kind of moments of quiet and solitude. Also with creative powers and our ability to create, recreate. And so I thank you so much for joining me today to have a close look at Caillebotte's blue irises. I hope that someday soon you will come to see them in the gallery and enjoy them as much as I do. Thanks for watching.